Hey, Greg.
Bradley.
Oh, Greg. I was worried because I sent you a response to your email, but I forgot to push send last night. I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen now.
It just does complete the cycle, but it turns out that I checked it. I did just check it, and I was about ready to head out. I was like, oh no, I don't have to go out now, so this works.
Very good. So how have you been?
Good. Doing my thing, and I'm really working hard on my book these days and trying to get that up and ready. So for this semester, that's my primary task.
That's very good. Get ready for the red buds and the dogwoods to come out, right?
What's that?
Get ready for the red buds and the dogwoods to come out.
Right. Well, then there's right. So hopefully by summer now, but hopefully then I will, as everything's blooming, then I can bloom my book, and maybe we'll be able to wander around a little bit more freely these days.
That'll be nice. We'll see about how that works out. I'm like, it's an interesting function that it occurs to me that the certainty of everything is quite diminished
Yeah.
for everybody, and it's quite troubling because it's like my profession as a physician that I regard as quite protected, but the uncertainty level is quite high.
No doubt.
And it's like I'm confident that the general population has a higher level of it, and it's very disturbing to me. And I'm sure in a general societal sense, it's disturbing everybody.
Yeah.
It's like, try to knock through it and make a good showing of it, right?
Yeah.
So very good. What I wanted to talk about today was the transition between an analog state and a digital state in human consciousness, and what the significance of it is.
Okay.
And it's like when I was making some notes for myself on this fine diagram that you provided. The issue is like, I look at human social organization in an evolutionary sense as stemming from human needs as animals, like family groupings, to larger and larger social groupings as we arrive in the present state. And largely what it appears to me as we look at the point where life becomes conscious, self-conscious, so we have a mind, is when we start organizing our thoughts on these processes and creating justification systems for our social organizational patterns. And beyond the tribal state, which is like still like an extended family construction, we end up to get a civilization like Babylon or something like that. You develop a religion, and it creates an overarching scheme that allows the public to understand what's going on. And it is the elaboration of these schemes that brings us to our current state, which is like, okay, it may be hopelessly confusing. I don't know. But it is the translation from the analog state to the digital state that is interesting to me. And it is, there's a fellow named Kurt Doolittle who has talked about this, and he says that it's epistemologically different. The analog state is epistemologically based upon the standard of reasonability between cooperating members. And the standard of epistemologic reality in a digital state is calculability. And it is interesting to me to consider intersubjective differences inside a calculable system, right? And it's like, which is that, I want to hear what your impression of that is, because that's interesting.
Yes. Well, okay, so the words analog and digital are, they're useful here. They're also potentially complicated, so I would want to be clear. So to me, here's the way, at least at a societal level, I think that it's a very reasonable thing to call us as on the cusp of or having just begun the digital age. I think that's a reasonable frame for where we are. And I believe that's hugely important. And I believe it's a transition phase from different modes of being. And maybe if the word analog captures what comes before, I'm okay with that. But here's what I mean by the digital age, and this is why I think it's super important. I think what the person said about the computational ability is reasonable versus understandability, and we can talk about that. And I think there's going to be some massive changes in that direction, at least at the level of what I would call cultural consciousness. Okay, so cultural consciousness refers really to the shared broad sensibilities and intelligibility capacity that humans have when they plug in together and create a collective understanding. Okay, and what on the tree of knowledge, what capital C culture is the unique human capacity to do that through language and through self-recursion and explicit justification, okay, and talking back and forth in question-answer dialogue. And that creates a new kind of mind, which is different than the animal mind, which is what's represented in the layer beneath, which in the animal mind is that's its own kind of consciousness. I view certainly most animals with brains and active bodies probably have consciousness, and they certainly have mind in the way that tree of knowledge language system works. But what humans get on top of that is a talking mind, and that talking mind generates collective intelligence, and that intelligence then evolves and creates systems of understanding. We're absolutely, in my opinion, and I think we alluded to this, is that there's an oral indigenous tradition that emerges for, say, 50,000 years or so, pre-writing and pre-agriculture and pre-civilization. And that's a particular kind of maybe analog consciousness that is before the written word. And then what happens with agriculture into civilization, or ultimately into Babylon and Egypt and the Bronze Age civilizations, is a tremendous transformation in the size and technological complexity of cities and the magnitude of the way they work. And so then you get writing and laws and religions, large-scale religions, that then, like you say, sort of coordinate and teach people how to be as clusters of people that will never meet at a personal level, or at least don't have personal relations, but have to have a shared identity that coordinates them about what is and ought to be, like a religion and a national belief system would be. So you have, Hammurabi's code, as it were, which are the laws of what you will do and how we'll manage market exchange and hierarchy and all of that. And so you get then the traditional formal civilization stage, which is from about 5,000 years ago to, up to maybe about 500 years ago. Then 500 years ago, we get the transition into the modern world, okay? Modern science, or modern empirical natural science, breaks off in Europe from the Judeo-Christian dominant frame of understanding. And then it and capital labor, modernity, enlightenment relations explode across the globe, okay? And then we create, through, whether it's a, colonial white male dominance or enlightenment or progression in human things, there are lots of different angles on this, but we do then create this globalized system of exchange in the 20th century. And our technologies grow and grow, and then our technologies make a massive shift in the 20th century in terms of the way they start operating. We build computers, okay? We build the internet, and we build artificial intelligence interfaces, both within them and between us and them, okay? So now what we have is a globalized system that is engaged in information processing and communication networks that are now operative through a totally different medium, the digital medium, okay? And our you know, the Marshall McLuhan is a famous philosopher and technological technology theorist, and he's like, man makes tools, and then tools make man. He's got a famous. In other words, we build the tools, and then we use the tools to give, because they give us certain kinds of affordances, and they allow us to think in certain ways. But then they shape exactly how we think, given the mediums of energy information that they afford us. Okay. I believe that the digital is the greatest, and I just mean in terms of size and implication, tool that the human has ever built. It's bigger than writing, and it's bigger than agriculture. It represents the biggest potentially transformative system of energy information transfer that we've ever seen. And I believe that it's an enormously big deal in terms of what it means for the 21st century. And the basic structure of the tree of knowledge orients me towards that. The tree of knowledge says that the biggest shifts in behavioral change, each one of those joint points, okay, emerge as a function of information processing and communication networks. Okay? So, you know, cells, DNA, RNA are going to be thought of in information storage and computation terms, and then they build cells which then communicate, and then animals do that with a nervous system, and then animal communicate. And of course, we're talking, so minds get linked together. That's what gives rise to really culture. Now, what I say was we've interfacing with material culture in a dynamic, digital, artificial intelligence interface system. And so the explosion of what that potential means is enormous, okay? And then the idea that we're then transitioning into digital consciousness, or what I would call a digital cultural consciousness, meaning that the ways in which we manage our interface, how we manage policy, how we store information, how we use scientific knowledge to gather stuff like big data, it just is, you know, almost an infinite landscape of potential and possibility. That's a glorious thing and a scary thing simultaneously. So that's my kind of frame. I'll stop there and see if you want to pick up on anything, or if that's what our shared system understanding is, and then like, well, how is this digital world going to change us? Then that's a really great set of questions.
There's no question that this is entirely correct as a model for understanding what is occurring and what potentials lay in front of us. There's no question about that. The thing that I resonate with well is that this McLuhan's thesis that it's a cybernetic linkage between the human and the tools they use, and they will change the trajectory of our interaction with the material world. There's no question about it. But it is the dangers associated with this digitization, as well as the opportunities there, is just quite an interesting potential that is being unleashed. And it is like at the same time liberating and then potentially shackling everybody to it's tyrannical potential is opened up, and it's like, and it's up to us to choose how we play it.
Beautiful.
And what a moment to be. It's crisis. I think that it happens every time you have one of these joint points. You know, it's a crisis occurs because it's like there's going to be a winnowing process, and something is going to be left behind, and some things are going to be carried forward. And it's like, okay, and it's a choice has to be made at the crossroads, and it's like that's where we are. And I guess that's what interests me about this transition, which is to say that the way the issue is human values, and we have different values between us, and specifically in a cultural sense, that
Yep.
we have a multitude of cultures that value different things, and we hear absolutely absurd propositions coming forward that in the name of, if I dare say it, I will say equity. Okay, when you say that mathematics is racist, I'm thinking that I don't care to be equitable with you. Okay, because it's like that's nonsensical. And it's like, because equity means nothing if mathematics means nothing. And so that's why I will point to this calculability issue is like, how do we manage to coexist, which is like to operate in a cooperative sense, which is, and I look at morality as a cooperative function. Everybody knows how to behave, and when somebody's behaving in an abnormal fashion, it's costing everybody a lot in transactional cost associated with conducting business in the environment we're in. So it's immoral to act too weird because now everybody is not paying attention to their job, or right, because it's like, what is going on over there? I got to be on my guard because I don't understand. I thought we were playing a nice orderly game, and now it's like something is absolutely not orderly and needs to be tidied up so that we can get back to work. And so cooperation is the highest form of human good in terms of social engagement because it's the least costly. And there is certain, I guess, groups, elements in the social environment that regard normality or like normality as a bad. And they wish to alter the normality by disruptive behavior. And it's like that qualifies as immoral behavior in my sense of orderliness with regard to social conduct in that framework. And it's like, how do you account for it is the question in terms of like, when is orderly a problem and when is disorderly a problem?
Beautiful.
And
Yes.
it's like, well, we have to have a method to do that. And it's like, so I will point to Carol Quigley's work, which is Evolution of Civilization from 1960. And he's like, he makes these astounding statements, which is, I'm going to expound upon it in another video. I think the issue is there's three classes of institutions of note in our society. There's the institutions of class oppression, which he says governs the politics of the nation. There's the institutions of irrationality, which interestingly guides the intellectual life of the nation. And the institutions of imperial war, which control the military might. And so it's like the issue is, it appears to be that the conflict is over the instruments of class oppression. By Nietzsche would say revaluation of all values and turn things over and then aim at oppression at a different group. And that's the politics. And then it's politics. But and that's what it appears to have been done by the I call them the postmodernists, but it's probably not quite correct.
I think that postmodern is part of it. I think I call it the edge of the progressive movement, which then for me becomes the hyper-progressive postmodern movement, which is trying to frame the majority culture as, a hegemonic colonial structure through social identity, meaning white, male, cisgendered identity becomes fused with an unfair, unearned privilege that then the system is trying to leverage rhetoric around to undo and repair. That's basically what the justification process is in terms of, at one level of description.
Yeah, I agree with the premise of one level of description, although I will parenthetically say that it's a justification for disruptive behavior, which is anti-normative in its function. And
well, right. This is. I mean, certainly we want to be careful about normative, because normative doesn't always mean good, right? Because, like you said, there's definitely times where you want to be the one that stands up and says, there's a famous picture of Adolf Hitler where everyone's like this, okay, and then there's a guy sitting there like this, and you know, in those systems, you want to be like, how the hell that guy managed to sit there like that and stand up to that normativity? That's a unbelievably beautiful and painful question, and we're all vulnerable to herd-like behavior. So there are aspects of normativity that, in fact, in my world, you know, the actual, or by my academic world, I am, so here's how, at least on this identity issue, I'm what's called a metamodernist, okay? So I will identify modernity in a particular sensibility. I identify the postmodern sensibility in this regard, and the metamodern is what comes after really postmodern, which is basically a return to aspects of modern. It includes and transcends the critiques of and the sensibilities of both modern and postmodern, and I believe provides a framework really for meta values that would be available to sort of at the global level. I believe that there are meta values that are available at the global level. That global level is a particular kind of value, and national is another kind of value. And we need layers of value across different socio-ecological spheres. Okay, so global is the biggest. They're global, then they're transnational constituents like United States and Europe might be a transnational, and then there's national. You know, it's like we're different than Canada. You and I need to get together, we vote, and we have our identity. And then there's subnational, which is like, oh, you're in the West, I'm in the East, those kinds of stuff, okay? So each of those have particular appropriate layers of identity. I am a critic of the extreme, what I call the extreme postmodern progressive left, okay? And I think that's what we were, and at least we may have different language of it, but that system.
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, you know who we're talking about. And I mean, I live in the academy. So right now the academy has been taken over, in my opinion, ideologically captured by an anti-racist white fragility movement that certainly has been building for a while and then got sparked in the George Floyd Black Lives Matter movement, and now is seen as normative in my group. And those are the kinds of individuals that would look at math books and find any particular possible thread of racist normativity, and then say the entire math book now is a racist propaganda. And I'm just sort of like, oh my God, you know, we're this is a disaster of serious proportions. And I'm standing up to the normativity of that's emerging, and I'm saying, no, I don't like that at all. That's trouble. And now I'm seen as a conservative white guy of all things. So it's a pretty funky world, depending on where you are, Bravery.
Who's looking, right?
Every event's on where you're looking, but a lot of people now in the academy look at me and it's like, God, that guy's conservative.
But it's like my opinion regarding the academy and those who are wielding such opinions and influence, they're a political party, and in the guise of academics, and it's they have no legitimate purpose there, in my opinion, because they are intent upon colonialist activity. And it's like, okay, I don't regard it as legitimate, and it's like, well, that's just my opinion, and I'm just another conservative white guy, right? And it's like, at least that's their opinion, in my estimation, which hasn't been, I don't really care, because I'm like, because the sensibility of it doesn't meet the standard of reasonable, much less calculable. And it's like, it's in fact, I regard it as corrosive behavior. It's antisocial behavior for the purpose of dominating the social environment with the noise that they generate, at the exclusion of all other competing intellectual constructions. So it's dangerous, and you know, it's like this. Jordan Peterson talks about this. He said, we know when the right goes too far with their ethno-nationalism. I think he said how he would say it, but we don't have a line for when the left goes too far. And I said, that's entirely false, Dr. Peterson. He just doesn't know what he's talking about. The fact is, it is with regard to free speech. The suppression of free speech I saw a very great meme. It was like this. It said, when in history were the book burners the good guys? I'm waiting. And I'm like, that's where we're at. It's like the suppression of free speech by violent means is brown shirt behavior. And it's like, okay, to recognize that as what it is all it is.
What I think that Peterson means, and I think he's actually is right about this, is that from the inside of the right, okay, the inside of the right, at least the argument can be made on the heels of something like the Nazi atrocities, the right became clear about some aspects of ethno-nationalism that were beyond the pale, like flat out racism and flat out, eugenic kind of genocide identities for the kind of ethno-nationalism that's okay. The right itself would then say, no, you're not allowed to be an ethno-national racist who then subjugates other social categories in bad terms and bad faith efforts. So what he's saying is the right has found its limits, and actually, at least there's a reasonable right that is clear about what those limits are from within. What he is saying is, and I think he's actually right about this, that from the left does not currently know, like the left doesn't know how to stand up with clarity of boundary in the academy and understand when has it gone too far. I mean, it's going to find out eventually. And you see some things like Brett Weinstein's Evergreen, and there are a number of, there are probably 10 at least college campus disasters, okay, which would, to anybody from the outside, at least from my vantage point, would be diagnostic of where the line is. But inside the left, and inside the left, like somebody like me, who should be inside the left and should be able to stand up and say, hey, this is histrionic crazy behavior, it doesn't know how to legitimize that. It just says, no, Greg, you're a conservative white guy now. So what he is saying is that there's not a way for the left itself to know where its limits is. And I actually believe that that's a reasonable insight. And my experience is that many people are just naively good-intentioned people that said, sure, of course we want to correct for the racism and the injustices that cisgendered white men have perpetuated. In fact, that's where my heart was in the mid 1980s, or through the mid 1990s, as somebody who socialized into the psychological, social sciences, social services. My whole heart is there, but the system itself inside of it hasn't woken up to be like, well, how far is too far? They don't know where the answer is to that, and that's one of the things that makes it very dangerous.
I think it's interesting. It's like the cancel culture. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And it's like they say the left eat their young or eat their, you know what I mean? They just don't know when. It's self-consumptive because it's like it's radicalization without limit.
Mm-hmm. Right. So that's what I hope that it wakes up pretty soon. It's like, oh God, we're going to end up, like look at the book burners or look at the French Revolution. Just like. Yeah, these things spin out of control.
It's Dr. Seuss.
And right, Dr. Seuss. Although, I mean, the Dr. Seuss thing's a little complicated because whenever somebody does it on their own at some level without being called out, I think that we have to be a little sensitive to the, if somebody else forced Dr. Seuss into this, I would be more sympathetic to calling it cancel culture. But that's complicated. But there are a lot of examples of cancel culture, that's for sure. And there are a lot of extreme, concerns about things like labeling. I saw some recent thing where in a New York City sub-school, like they're saying, no, don't refer to your parents as mom and dad because that's cisgendered, right? It's like, okay, so now that's what? So that's like
so it's like this enforcing novelty in substitution of normative behavior.
That's right. That's exactly what it is.
Control of the language, which is absolutely a cultural hegemonic function.
Right. That's exactly right.
Which is like the parents tolerate it, I suppose, until they don't.
Well, right. People are going to. The question is, so just so that the audience is following along, let's be clear about what post-structural, postmodern justice identity is around, particularly things like feminist into critical race theory. The whole idea is that, like a Foucault analysis, although Foucault is very sophisticated as a post-structuralist, in like power and knowledge, and we can use the unified theory language, that people will build systems of justification that are normative to the people in power. Okay? In other words, that it is, unless it's reflective, if I'm in power, I will then distribute what is normatively good to be that which is close to me. That's the natural tendency. Okay, so things that are like me and that are cooperative with me, that's good. And things that are not like me at all, that are bad. And then I'll build systems of normative justification that are consistent with that. The argument is that the language power got tied up with social categories like maleness, whiteness, and cisgenderedness, okay? And that there has been, the Great Awakening is to try to leverage the control of language to undo that association and repair it, so that anywhere you look, you then can see, well, is this category of language, like calling your parents mom and dad, well, that reinforces and normatizes the idea that there are two genders, ergo, it is now to be undone. And because the system has no idea inside itself to say, oh my God, what function does all of this serve, as opposed to just oppression, it can't wake up and be like, it doesn't have a self-regulatory corrective insanity button. And that's what metamodern really is. Metamodern is like, well, this is clear when this gets insane. And these are the principles that we should be shooting for. And that puts safeguards on the idea that, yes, we should be reflective about, at least I believe, I'm in the left, we should be reflective about certain kinds of hierarchy and privilege and structural racism, I do believe is a real thing. And there's lots of different ways to angle oneself on this. The extreme views are unchecked, and they are then actually, they're performative contradictions in the sense that they now try to essentially say, we're going to control the language and manipulate the language so that we get placed in power in a way in the name of justice. It's just sort of like, you know.
Well, so I would say this is arguably what has occurred. And they are, in fact, in power and doing it.
Well, they're definitely in power in many places. I'll tell you that, inside the academy. I'm a fan of Jordan Peterson inside the academy at the level of, I think he had courage to stand up. Whether they're in power in the general society is a much more complicated question. But whether they're in power in some pockets of the intelligentsia, there's no doubt in my mind that they are.
Well, so in question, I would say reaching down into the primary schools. Unquestionably, and it goes like this: I would argue from my position, which is on the other side of the right-left thing. Okay, I'll be on the right. It's okay. Which is populism is the response. That's how the people defend themselves against the predatory activities of the hegemons who have occupied all the positions of authority in the established order. And it's like they have no choice but to do that, to politically defend themselves from the political predatory activities of these people. And it's like, it's a natural response.
I think, in fact, that's what split me. So after like Trump's election, okay, you could divide then the left in terms of whether, if you were center left like me, I looked at the hyper left and said, hey, we're pushing too far and we haven't shown how to police ourselves, which is then going to elicit a populist reaction. And therefore, I looked at the hyper left and got critical of them. From the hyper left perspective, which is for them the normal good perspective, it's just the underlying populism is this white identitarian bullshit that we knew that was there all along. And look, we're just showing it to you, so we have to try harder. You know, and so that's a radically different interpretation of whether this is a reaction to the extreme of the left or whether it reveals its underlying structure to begin with. And, you know, I am much more on the, hey, you know, take a notch down because I lean, although I'm left, I lean center for order and rational, you know, structure and clarity and development and all of that stuff. But anyway.
Right. So it's like this an interesting function because it's like, now you're familiar with the Overton Window.
Sure.
Which is the conversation allowed in polite company, right? The limits of conversation in polite company. And it's like this, the society has become quite polarized, and I think it's not accidental. And it's interesting to me that it's like the society at large has become diplopic. where there's segments of the Overton window which half see and half do not see. So it's like, yeah, you're not having stereoscopic vision anymore, where we've lost something, and the disconnect has to be rectified in some fashion. And that's kind of where I go with this, the calculability to digital understanding, because it's like how we should be able to calculate a reasonable, actual image of what's happening and how people should behave, how society functions, and it always comes to the politics again, because politics is, how do we apply the instruments of force to properly oppress the people who should be repressed and who should be repressed, right? And it's like everybody's pretty convinced it's not them, right?
Right. Rarely people, hey, I want to be repressed.
So it is, and it, it's like this. So it's like this. It kind of goes to natural law, which is how do we cooperate? We know how to behave so that we can be cooperative.
Yep.
And we don't need force to make us behave properly. So it's not necessary to oppress because we know how to behave. And it's like we seem to be losing that one, because it seems like the instruments of force are being ramped up.
Yes.
At least domestically, and I'm talking about only internally within national politics,
Okay.
not
Yeah.
internationally at the moment. And
I 100% agree with your point about the stereoscopic splitting and the absence of a center and the structures that are polarizing us. And what digital is going to do in relationship to that is a fascinating, an unanswered question, because it's bouncing all over the place. I mean, certainly the Twitter social media early indications is that it hyperpolarizes us. That's the I don't know if that will continue. I don't think, no one knows what's going to happen. I think that the early data are in and says, yep. What happens is that the algorithms, lead to tribal grouping behavior. The people that benefit from this polarization can dump all sorts of signals. They get channeled into the stereoscopic systems of groupthink and then feed off this more and more polarized structure. That's the early indicator, and that's deeply dangerous to our national identity. And I'm very concerned about that.
It is the polarization appears to be driven by interested media outlets, and it's thriving off of outrage and strong emotionality and not much rationality, which is like not intelligent discourse, but emotional response. So it's sort of driving animal responses, not human responses to very complex circumstances. And it's like, I'm profiting from it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's noteworthy. I read an article yesterday. It was interesting. It was like this: since the former President Trump is no longer the president, that the media have begun to decline again because there's nobody to get outraged. That's one.
Totally. Yeah. No. He was whatever you thought of him, for news political outlets, he was a boon at the level of attention. He was such a lightning rod of attention that you couldn't stop looking at him from either direction. It definitely was that.
Well, so it is. It's I guess the interesting phenomena is this, and this is where I guess where I would like to point for a future discussion, perhaps, is that we have to have methodology for accommodation for various human value structures in the social circumstance, so culturally. And I think the digital is to be used in such a fashion to allow us to express ourselves as we choose culturally and fit into that in a cooperative manner to create a global, you would say, metaculture. I would say that is symbiotic and not antagonistic. I think that's reasonable. Beautiful. And then we don't need we need to cooperate and be productive and not destructive to each other and to the larger biosphere.
Absolutely.
I think it can be done, but I think that I want to discuss that more, because it's like there is work to be done and considered for how do we make intersubjective differences workable in a like a judicial system that is civil, because that's, civil versus military, right?
Mhm.
And then so we can resolve our disputes in a civil manner.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I really believe this is, or at least we're circling around one of the great questions of the 20th century and whether or not we will be successful. I mean, my feeling is that success happens if we figure out a wise way to merge technology with our relations across all of these socio-ecological scales. Okay? My friend Greg Thomas, borrowing off of another philosopher, talks about that should be guided by a rooted cosmopolitanism. Okay? So the rooted is the awareness that we are social, creatures that are roots in particular places in this socio-ecological terrain, and we shouldn't apologize for that. And so, I mean, I'm a white European Indo-American man. Woohoo! Okay, fine. And there's nothing wrong with that or to be guilty about in relationship to that. And my American sensibility is going to be different than somebody in Korea or Saudi Arabia, and for good reason, and that I can be proud of that at one level. And at the same time, if I move into a global sensibility, okay, my appreciation for other people's differences, I have to be able to step outside my rooted paradigm and have a cosmopolitan attitude about people that are rooted in different places. And this is a very high level skill, to be able to navigate that. And if we can navigate this kind of consciousness, this capacity to be embracing of our paradigms and our rootedness, but also to be able to step adjacent to them and connect with other people from very different paradigms, that would be great if we can. I think that's happening some, and I think it's also, it's a hell of a growing process, and we're in the beginning phases of that. But that's my hope. The unified, theory knowledge system has an angle on this at several angles, but it does say that it offers a particular perspective that, and you have mentioned this, we need to be very reflective about the values at the appropriate socio-ecological scale. Okay? And so then this invites us to consider, well, are there meta-global values, okay, that are universal in the human arena that we would be playing in, that would transcend the rooted national view? Okay, so are there systems? And I think that there are. I actually think there are examples of them. I think there are ways to frame them. And I think that they provide a particular kind of portal or frame to build common ground at the global level. That is, if there are meta level values that we are capable of embracing, that creates the stage for cooperation at the right level of abstraction. And if we can cooperate globally at the right level of abstraction, that's one of the great, well, how to do that's one of the great challenges, because we're also national, local creatures, and we need to have a rootedness in our national, local systems. But anyway, that's the variables and the facets that
That's the moment. It's the challenge of the moment, right?
Yeah.
Not the moment is probably going to last way longer than is comfortable for anybody. That's my take on it. It's like nobody has to like it, right? Because it's like this crisis, crossroads. The devil's at the crossroads, and it's like you've got to pick which way are you going to go. How are we going to parse this out and conclude and get on the path? And which direction are we going to go? And how are we going to do it? And it's excruciating is a good word, right? And it is no. I don't think it's coincidence that this crucifixion, it's just rough, and it's like nobody has to like it, but we have to figure out how we're going to make the passage, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, shoot, man, we're not going to conclude it today, are we?
Well, I certainly what my view is, or I think, the tree of knowledge, at least what I think that we'll do better if we can get clear on the variables and we can communicate them clearly, and we can all, as humanity, start to have a shared narrative and a conversation about what we value, and think about at least what are the problems and possible solutions, and come to Mike Muscolo on, part of the Unified the Theory of Knowledge Society has a thing that I work with him some on called creating common ground. And it says, be very wary of, it's a meta-political system, meaning that it's like step outside the current political positions, okay? Like be very wary about getting tracked into a position, which then makes an affirmative justification about what is and ought to be, that then plants you in a particular way, okay? Which then is going to then, especially if it's planted against politically or in another position. His system is like, as soon as you do that, to the extent that we do that, we're going to create all sorts of static and tension and set the stage for, at least a deconstructive conversation, okay? He argues that a clearer path is to create common ground is you start with things like needs, problems, and values. Okay? So like, well, if we think about 2050, our world at 2050, what are our values about what we would hope it would sort of look like, okay? What were the problems that we see? How would we then throw out possible solutions and then listen to other solution-oriented language and relation? And one of the processes is to engage in valued conversation at various levels of abstraction, okay? And certainly one of the things that I've emphasized is that I believe that one of our challenges in the intelligentsia side, there are a lot of challenges, but one of the challenges is sense making. Yes. And how do we sense make about science on the one hand, and about human values and religion and theology and the wisdom traditions on the other? And can we do that in a way that actually yields a kind of worldview that would be amenable to people from many different parts of the globe, sort of leaning into and finding themselves reflected in their values. And I think that's I think that is possible if it's gone about the right way, in a particular way. And the Tree of Knowledge and Theory of Knowledge system, offers some reflections and framings, at least, from my small little vantage point. It sounds grandiose. I want to be clear. I'm aware of a small little vantage point, but it's an interesting vantage point. And those are the kinds of things I think that a meta-political, like i.e. outside of politics, that looks at proper levels, that engages people in civil discourse about values and possible solutions. I think those are some of the things that we need.
When you say sense making, I register epistemological. Is that close enough?
Yeah. So I actually, to me, we want to understand both epistemological. So we should be reflective about, well, how do I know? So what's my data? Who do I listen to?
Right.
And then how do I justify why I have the knowledge I do relative to other systems of justification? So it's data-based, and processes of justification create epistemology, okay? Then you have ontology, which is your theory about what is real, okay? And the Tree of Knowledge gives us a new way to think about scientific onto-epistemology, which basically it's a new theory of scientific ontology that says, hey, here's a way of thinking about the natural world scientifically, but it's very different in that it includes, as part of its scientific ontology, a way to understand scientific epistemology, as in systems of justification, and then it gives rise to this holistic, coherent, naturalistic picture that says, oh, we can now understand scientific knowledge in a way that's a lot more congruent with our human souls, okay? And that's one of the things that I don't think science has been really good at, is to be framed in a way that is both coherent and also consistent with our lived experience and consistent with at least metaphorical aspects of the wisdom traditions. And the Tree of Knowledge says, actually, yeah, no, the scientific ontology, I think of the best scientific ontology is actually very consistent with our human hearts as we sense them, and with a lot of at least the metaphorical and value-based assertions of the great wisdom traditions, and that affords us a much more hopeful and coherent view overall of how we might understand ourselves in the world.
Well, I think that's wonderful. I recommend that people check out your website. It is, I'll make sure the show notes contain it. The
Sure.
Tree of Knowledge system.
Mhm.
I keep it bookmarked because the unified theory of knowledge.
Mhm.
And it's worth checking out because it has profound potentials and allows a vantage point that is unique and worthy of consideration.
I appreciate
So
that.
I appreciate the work you've done on it for the last 25 years.
Started in 1996, 1997. So, yep, it's been my life's passion. And, if folks check it out and find any value with it, well, that warms my heart. So,
very good. Well, Greg, I want to thank you for meeting with me and having an enlightening conversation too.
I appreciate it. Excellent questions. These are the kinds of things that I think we need to have happen moving things forward. So,
all right. Well, I look
man.
forward to chatting with you again. Okay.
All right. Take care, Bradley.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.